Welcome back. We are doing a drawing from one of Goya's Capriccio drawings. This is called Que Sacrificio. What a sacrifice. And I believe it refers to the fact that this beautiful young woman is being preyed upon by these disgusting old men. So we have the main figure is obviously the young woman. We're going to draw her first, and then we're going to add these guys around her. And we're going to start with her head. I'm going to draw a little center line down the head just to show that her head is turned slightly to my right. And I'm going to draw a little bit on top of Goya so you can see how I'm thinking. So here's the center line for the face. Here's the center line for the rib cage or the sternum. You see how that kind of forms a backwards S shape? So we've got the center line coming down the face. It kind of flows into the sternum, and usually the rib cage sort of tips back a little towards the neck like this. So I'm creating a kind of a schematic of this figure before I start to do any contours, and I want you to do the same thing. Contour is an outline. I'm not doing an outline. I'm just doing a simplified version of the major forms. And I'm going to imagine her pelvis sort of as a form in here, and the rib cage here. And you can see that these forms together form. They are not stacked vertically on top of each other. There's a real sort of implied arch to the back. We can't see it because the arm's covering it, but we can see by how far back the dress is that the pelvis is really tipped. Here's the little waistband, the little belt. And notice that we're going to experiment with some plumb lines. If I take a plumb line from the pit of the neck straight down, you see how I end up at the heel? So let's draw that. That's going to orient us for where the heel needs to be. And in terms of height, we could take a measurement. I can go from the heels to the top of the head. And what I would anticipate is that the center should be at the greater trochanter, which should be about here. If I measure that, I can see that there's just a little extra space on the bottom half. And that's explained, I think, pretty efficiently by the fact that the heels are very tall. Can you see that? So what we want to end up with is, here's the center line. So that's the trochanter, and we should end up with just a little extra space down here to accommodate the high heels. Clothed figures are a lot harder than nude figures. I know it's difficult to believe because the anatomy seems challenging, but it's even more challenging when you can't see the anatomy and you sort of have to make this stuff up. So we have a general shape that's kind of like this. And notice it has a lot of movement, right? We're sort of, and I want you to check your drawing right now, and if your drawing looks more like this, which is, I guarantee some people are doing this, and everything is just sort of stacked, one volume on top of the other, without any of that beautiful kind of back and forth movement. I want you to try to like get a little more of this and a little less of that. This is everyone's default as a beginner, is just stack those volumes as if you were, you know, building a little tower out of rocks or blocks or something. And that's not how the human figure works. And notice that the wrists, her shoulders are kind of drooping, so the wrists are down. They meet just to the left of this sternum line and a little below the level of the trochanters. So I'm actually going to draw this hand before I draw the arm. Just a very simple little hand. And that'll allow me to wrap that arm around behind the rib cage and bring this arm up to the shoulder. The point of the shoulder here comes out not nearly as far as the back of the dress. It sort of lands inside this other heel. So if we draw that other heel here near the edge of the skirt and come straight up, that's sort of where we want to end up with that shoulder. And the arm gracefully kind of snakes around like that. And this, at this point, is looking like what artists would refer to as a gesture drawing. A good gesture drawing should be clear enough that if you saw the drawing and someone asked you to get into that pose, you'd be able to read the drawing well enough to assume that pose. After I've done a gesture drawing, what I like to do is the face. Very bad idea to put the face off to the very end. So this is a very simplified little face. Not much to it. There's only a few lines. We're going to have to try to get them right. So we're going to take a couple measurements. We're going to ask ourselves, are the eyes centered on the head? I would say yes. So we're going to mark where the top of the skull would be, bottom of the chin, and put the eyes in the middle. Then we're going to use some fractional thinking, and we're going to ask ourselves, here's this interval to the right of the nose, and here's this interval, if I imagine where the back of the ear is, to the left of the nose. And I could fit about at least 3 of these intervals in here, which means the nose is only about a quarter of the way along this line, the line between the eyes. So we're going to put this about here. And the mouth, as we expect it to be, is a third of the way between the nose and the chin. And even in this really simple little drawing, he's got that little Cupid's bow shape. Everybody see that? And that's weird. I can't. And it's even slightly asymmetrical in that the part on the right is a little bit smaller than the part on the left. There's a little shadow under the bottom lip. And the eyes are looking downward, so we're going to just draw these little curves. And be sure you leave enough room. Notice, and this is a classic three-quarter view, it might be useful to think about the center of this eye is basically in the center of the head. You see that? So most people are going to want to crowd this eye too far to the right. We're going to pop it in right in the middle of the head. We're going to add eyebrows. There's a little broken line to show the chin, but there's no jawline indicated. And the hairline is these kind of squiggles. And look at look how much of the hair he leaves blank, which really gives it a lot of sheen. Or it could be a headscarf, I'm not honestly sure, but. And then we're coming above the skull slightly here and here to show how much that fullness that her hair has. I want to reinforce the idea that when we do a copy, you can do the worst copy in the world and it can still be a very valuable experience, because when you copy something, you're basically just proving to yourself that you've really looked at the whole drawing. Because every time in order to copy a line, you have to look at that line. And most people feel like they have looked at drawings and they really have seen very little. So her face is reading slightly big for her body in my drawing, but I feel like it might be happening in the original too. So her neckline is these little broken marks, which I would never think to do. In terms of mark making, when you do a copy, you learn so much, because artists are going to make choices that that come out of years and years of practice that you would never think of making for yourself. So here's where we had that little belt. And if you can, just try to get, we're not doing a close copy, we're not copying every little line, but try to get a little bit of the feeling and energy of this drawing into your work. You can maybe appreciate, at least I can, from a drawing like this, like in some ways, it was really an advantage that they didn't have photographs to work from, because it's hard to imagine doing a drawing this kind of loose and energetic from a photograph. The best you can do is to take a bunch of photographs and really not try to copy any of them too precisely if you want to get this kind of quality into your work. And I also want you to notice that I did that construction drawing underneath. I'm never going to have to erase any of that because I did it so lightly, and now I'm drawing so much darker that those searching lines that I started with are really not going to take away from the effect. And they, in fact, probably add a little bit to the kind of energy of the drawing. And here's just a beautiful simplification of the hand. There's the thumb, the body of the hand sort of overlaps slightly by the wrist, and just these little indications of these bent fingers and knuckles. It's just amazing how legible a drawing like this can be with so few rendered out details. It's like you can read the pose of those hands so beautifully, but they are so simple. I mean, I just copied them both in about 30 or 40 seconds. There's so little to it, but the simplifications are so clear. This tradition with the caricatured figures on the left is a tradition of what they call in art the grotesque, which is actually a technical term. And this figure of this attractive young woman is obviously she's there partly for contrast, partly to tell a story, but also if you ever watch the old sitcoms of Addams Family or Munsters, there's the one normal looking kid in the family who sort of makes everyone else look all the weirder and stranger. That's sort of her role here. She's pretty normal proportions and makes everyone else look just all the more frightening, which was the intent of many of these etchings by Goya. So we're going to finish this figure, and then we're going to I'll take a quick break before we start the other ones. I think this is her hair. It really goes all the way down her back. So we're going to back out and sort of take another look at the whole figure. Again, just mind-boggling stuff here. Look at how few lines there are in this dress. But look at how you can actually read that it's a type of like satiny kind of shiny material. Can you read that? And what that is that this pattern of shading here, it doesn't really describe folds as much as reflections. I'm not going to do it justice here, but the thing is, if you can draw photographs all day long and copy them exactly and never really get better at it, when you copy drawings like this, you find ways to do things so much faster and so much more beautifully. And you can't learn that from a photograph. You're basically, we have the privilege of just following every line that Goya made and learning exactly how he represented these forms. And that's a wonderful thing for us. And for part of this upcoming assignment, if you would rather, you're going to be doing some studies from your own photos, but if you would like to do some studies from artists that you like, and see if you can learn some of their tricks, I would encourage that as well. I may even require it, because that's really good. Before you do AP, it's really good to have a little practice of doing copies from the kind of art that you like to look at. And the final detail, see that little dark under the heel? And this little contour of this heel and boot. And shading. You know, I emphasize shading directions so much, even though it doesn't always, it doesn't matter in some kinds of drawing, especially some charcoal and smudgy graphite drawing, but unless you understand hatching direction, if you move to a medium like this, which is etching, kind of intaglio print, you're going to be really lost. You need this because the only way you can make tone in a medium like this is with lines. And even painters use hatching techniques. It's so helpful to just sort of have internalize all those moves in your hand so they become just part of your natural vocabulary of movement. Okay, there she is. That's going to do it for her. I just made her a little bit doe-eyed, so I'm going to just make this eye a little smaller and that will have to do it. And we're going to now start to do some of these secondary characters. Now this first character is really our anchor at this point, so we're going to be able to relate the landmarks on the other characters to the landmarks we've already established on her. And for example, the top of this guy's head is level with around the pit of her neck. Bottom of his chin is level with her belt. And the back of his head overall would kind of fit into a squarish form. You see what I'm doing? And I don't always draw on my reference, but this is how I would be thinking about this. And that's why I love to teach this way, because I can show you with these lines the sort of analysis that would come naturally to me if I was drawing this just casually not as part of a lesson. So you see what I just did? I just simplified this placement into a square. I figured out where the square needs to go. His elbow is sort of to the left of her hands, and it's sort of even with the edge of this box. See that? So I'm going to tuck that in there. Try to follow along with me right now. He's got kind of a hunchback that goes through the center of this box, like that. And this goes almost straight down. And if we think of intervals, rhythms, you see how we've got this distance and this distance are about the same. So we know where this line goes, we know this distance, so the back of his hunchback should be about there. And this jacket falls sort of along a diagonal, if we imagine a diagonal through this square. And the bottom of this coat ends up being about a third of the way up here, like that. And his leg is weirdly kind of curved. So in a lesser artist, this would look like a mistake. If you go to figure drawing class, one of the worst things you can do is to draw limbs as if they didn't have any bones in them, as if they were made out of pasta or something, or like a posable figure. But this is Goya. This is obviously intentional. It's a little unsettling just how kind of rubbery he is, but it's all. I'm sure you've heard the term artistic license in your English classes. You know, like great writers no longer have to use the correct grammar all the time. Obviously, if you're in control of an effect like that, go ahead and do it. You just don't want to do it accidentally. So what I'd like to do now is this is obviously the primary of the grotesque characters. He's like the main one. And we're going to draw his portrait. So I'm going to zoom in on this beauty. He's got this very high collar. There's his cranium. So notice that his nose is literally like not a human nose. It's like, it really looks like a dog's nose. Can you see that? It's definitely modeled after a dog or a horse or a donkey, which Goya did that a lot in his Capriccios. Sort of these weird human mashups of human and animal forms. So we've got this, it's still correctly foreshortened. Got this big nostril on this side, this little one on the receding side. This collapsed muzzle form, which makes him look weirdly kind of old. And this very oddly shaped labial fold. And this very protruding bottom lip. The fun thing about drawing grotesques is that you can mess it up pretty bad. It's still going to look grotesque. So if you mess up beauty, it doesn't look beautiful. But if you mess up grotesque, it just looks grotesque in its own special way. So don't stress about this. And notice we really can't see the eye on the receding plane. And we can see the jawline a little bit. There's the little ear and this pretty receding hairline. And I think he's got a little ponytail or something, doesn't he? This giant collar. I don't know if he's meant to have like the gout or something, like a medical condition, but definitely a kind of swollen neck. So you may be wondering if you could do something like this for your project, and this project is pretty open-ended, so if you want to do a narrative drawing that has some grotesque or caricatured elements, that would be fine. What you'd want to do is experiment with those effects in some studies pretty soon to see if you can pull it off and see if you like drawing that way. Here's another beautifully rendered little foreshortened hand. See how the fingers, see how short those fingers are because they're going away from us. And look at the shading across the back of the hand. The perfect little indication of knuckles. Even the little thumbnail is legible. Such a challenge to make a drawing that's so simple that and yet so legible at the same time. And by legible, I'm sure you understand what I mean, but it's that you can read every form. And I've never copied this before, but I'm appreciating, like, this dude is actually more disturbing than I realized. There's something really gross about him. And he looks so happy. So when I scored AP tests, AP art portfolios last summer, one of the really common themes that I saw was people having some really ambivalent feelings about being looked at. And teenagers like to draw eyeballs, so a pretty common motif, surprisingly common, was like they do a little picture of themselves in the center of the frame and then like just put eyeballs all around it. I've had students attempt similar things, using the eyeball as a symbolic to tell the story about their discomfort with sort of being looked at, or social anxiety and stuff like that, which is obviously very common these days. I want you to reflect on, this really tells the same story, but in a way that I think is a little more dramatic and effective. It's definitely more inventive. Like it's definitely about being seen and being objectified in a way, and about the discomfort in that. But it's just so incredibly. He's not telling the story through symbolism. He's telling it through exaggeration. Symbolism is like reducing the gaze of all these creatures to just their eyeballs. Exaggeration is like taking what's sort of uncomfortable about their objectification of her and making it plain, which is, I think, artistically much more powerful. And also much harder to pull off, which is why you see less of it, but a little something to think about. occurs to me that we probably are not going to finish this drawing today, but we could finish it next time. Let's see how far we get. You will notice that his head is scaled much, it's like twice the size of her head, which is part of what makes this also uncomfortable. And we could I'm going to block in this other guy. This character is pretty interesting. Is he what's his function? It's very hard for me to tell. He seems dismayed by what's happening here. Would you agree with me? Like the guy with his, you see his hand covering his face. Yeah, he seems disappointed. So the question is he an ally of hers, or has he brought her here for this awful ceremony, whatever is going on here? Like, is he responsible for this, or is he a dismayed onlooker? And I wasn't able to find sort of more backstory on what this image might mean, but any great narrative image is going to raise questions like that, and it's going to make you really want to find out like what's going on. It's not going to be completely explicit. But look at how much emotion is in his face, and look how little of it we can actually see. We just see like the shading of his eye socket, a little shadow under his nose. And it really makes you think, like, how the heck did he do that? How does he convey so much in such a small space with so little detail? It's really, it speaks to the power of the human gesture, which we've talked a lot about. It's really the way his hand is up against his face that tells the story. So I'm going to stop recording in a minute and just leave this to finish next time. And maybe by then I'll have a little more information for you about if there is any backstory about this image. Okay. So we're going to proceed now to the leg of this crouching guy. And so along here we've got some hatched stripes. Great technique he's showing there. Notice that he's even made this stripe a little darker than the others because it's turning into shadow. And he's drawing across every stripe, not with the stripes, to create more of a look of fabric. And he's sort of randomly undulating these lines a little to make the guy's leg look kind of lumpy. So just throw some hatching in there. Don't worry if it's exactly right. Again, like I was saying last time, this leg is very elastic. There is really no sense of bones under this leg, which makes them look creepier and kind of snake-like. Great little simplification of the form of the boot here with the little upturned pointy toe. And the heel. A lot of artists don't appreciate just how much the heel of a lot of shoes and boots elevates the back of the foot off the ground. It's an important thing to pay attention to. And the way this upturned toe leaves the ground is indicated by this cast shadow, which shoots off to the right. And I'm going to throw in this other little simple shoe in the background of the other guy while we're down here. And one final boot and leg down here that we already kind of sketched in a little. There's a suggestion here of a fairly low vantage point, which is reinforced by, you see how this hatching is curving towards, it's arcing this way instead of this way. And that's sort of reinforcing the idea that we're looking up at this scene. I feel like our eye level is around the knees of these guys. You can also tell by the way these shoes, these figures, which this back one is pretty far from the front one, but the shoes are all very close to the same level. So he's deliberately using a low vantage point to make these trollish little guys look more kind of monumental and grotesque. Perhaps. I don't know. And here we've got a lot of dark, and we're not gonna worry too much about these details, although I will mention that here again we're curving. Most of our lines are curving this way, and we've got this bold highlight along the left, which makes it look like he's wearing some satin or leather pants or something, that some kind of shiny reflective surface on his pants. Little cross hatching along here. Little cross hatching under this elbow. And we're almost done. Few details, indication of large pocket on this coat. This shoe is very foreshortened. It's sort of tipped away from us. If you're falling behind, don't worry about so much of the hatching on the ground, but if you're caught up, you can do this with me. Remember when we shade the ground, I'm always telling you to use horizontal strokes. And you can see pretty clearly that that's the rule here. I honestly can't read exactly what kind of space we're in here. Like, is this a cloth backdrop that they're standing in front of in the studio? It's pretty vague, and that's sort of, but it works with the design. So you could consider that like a little piece of abstraction, this peculiar hatched background. He's basically just hatching until it looks good, is my best guess for what we're seeing here. And some very dense hatching over here. And now we're going to get into the last portraits. Like I said, don't worry about hatching all this ground. So I already kind of blocked in this little head. And I'm going to block this one in. You can see that this character seems to be kind of related to this one. It's almost the same head from a slightly different angle. And if I'm thinking, where do I put this edge of the shoulder? The measurements that I'm the most confident about are on the lady's head. So I can carry the top of this collar straight across, and I can see that it hits about at her eyebrow. So that would put the top of his collar about here. And then the outside of his shoulder ends right in front of the hunchback. So that becomes our basic shape. Then we can sketch in the collar, the cravat, little lapel, and look at how this hand just fits within this space. This is interesting because this is one of the things we try to avoid is tangents, but you see how that finger ends right at the edge of the shoulder. And these other fingers are foreshortened, so they're coming right towards us, so all we see are these little things that are shaped like these little eggish shapes. And there's this big thumb. The way he placed the hand inside this, it's almost like he doesn't really want you to notice the hand right away. Definitely a strange choice. Okay. So notice this little guy in back. This is the only head that's really facing us directly. And we're going to ask ourselves, first of all, are his eyes in the middle of his head? And I would say they are. So we'll make a line for the eyes across the middle. Notice his eyes are very wide set. That's part of the caricature of this guy. And they're very narrow, squinty eyes with heavy lids. So I'm going to do one eye here, and I'm going to put the other one way over here. These tiny, squinty eyes with very heavy eyelids and very raised eyebrows. And when someone's eyes are this far apart, we're going to be very reluctant to making the nose fill that whole space, but you can see that it definitely does. Nose is about halfway between the eyebrows and the chin, and it fills this entire space. So make it wide enough. It's sort of an upturned nose, so we don't see much of that middle line. And then we've got this little fold here for his kind of weird smile. And because he's smiling, the line between his lips is very high. And there's a little shadow under his bottom lip. And then he's got some hair. So if you're not getting the feel of this little character, don't stress about it. Just, you got to do hundreds of these, and it'll start to come easier. You're not going to get there by just fixing this until it's perfect. Just do these are quick little studies. And finally, this monstrous ponytailed guy. Obviously meant to be a relation of this guy, probably a brother or an uncle. Maybe royalty of some kind. There was a lot of inbreeding in the royal court in Goya's time in Spain. So you'll see in his portraits of the royal families, you see a lot of strange looking characters who look weirdly similar to each other because they're all related, like very closely. So, what am I going to ask myself first about this guy? I would say I'm going to ask myself, so here's the back of the head. There's the side of the head. I'm going to try to locate this eye, and it's pretty close to the middle. And that's typical in a 3/4 view. We're going to see the leading eye pretty close to the middle of the head. And then the bridge of the nose is about halfway between that eye and the side of the head. So that puts the bridge of the nose about here. And measure those things because those are the main things that you're going to tend to get wrong if you don't. And then we do this kind of menacing eyebrow. Here's another rule that Goya is breaking, which is on the shadow side of the head, you always shade the white of the eye. You see how he left the white unshaded? And because this guy is a major league genius, that's not really an error. It just kind of makes it look creepier. And this nose is coming all the way up to right under the eye. And its width is coming all the way back to behind the other eye. So it's this massive nose with a little hint of a core shadow along this side. And here's the other eye location that we measured, and he's got this weird eyelid, and notice that on this side it's very clear that the iris is down at the bottom of the white of the eye. His eyes aren't that well focused. This one's looking a little more up, and that one's looking a little more down. And he's got a massive mouth. Notice that his upper lip comes up under the tip of his nose. And his bottom lip comes almost down to his bottom of his chin. Very disturbing effect. And then he's got this little bit of like looks like chapped lips or a little ridges along his bottom lip, and maybe a little hint of a mustache. Look at the weird shift in scale between this guy that we just drew and the one who looks more like human. This guy's nose is about 1/8 the size of that guy's nose. Okay, this nice texture on this guy's arm, kind of a almost a checkerboard design. And we're gonna zoom out now and see how we did. My last comment here is going to be that I'm always talking about the importance of design, and you can see this looks much stronger with the cropping the way Goya has it. So I'm going to crop mine the same way. Look how much extra space he left on the top. I don't actually have room on my paper for quite that much. Well, almost. Definitely looks better in his formatting with that, with more space on top. On my rubrics for design, I'm always saying, you know, are the negative spaces activated by the shapes? Here you can definitely see, like, he's got a lot of extra space up here, but it's definitely activated by these figures and by this little decorative motif that's coming up here, these diagonals. I just cropped, you know, like 1 inch off the top, and it definitely doesn't look as good. So something to reflect on. Remember, it's not a design until it's cropped. And the cropping in a great design like this one, it really has to be, like, there's no better solution than what Goya came up with, if you ask me. Okay, that'll be it for today's video.